Welcome to the channel. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the like button so you don't miss any more shocking and captivating stories. Enjoy watching. David sat in the old leather chair, the one he'd bought years ago when he thought it would be the centerpiece of his study, his safe haven from the world. Now it felt like a throne, but not the kind a man would sit on with pride, more like a seat of judgment. The dining table in front of him, once used for family meals, now only held a cold cup of coffee, untouched since the morning. His hands trembled slightly, the edges of his mind fraying. The DNA test. The question that had been gnawing at him for months now. Could he really do it? Could he really ask her? The thought felt almost absurd. 5 years of marriage, 2 children, countless moments shared, and yet here he was at the edge of a precipice he never thought he'd approach. Was it really this simple? Just a test? Or was it an admission that something far darker, something deeper, had been festering beneath the surface of their lives? David and Maria had been married for over 2 decades. They'd met in college, fallen in love after a whirlwind romance, and got married shortly after graduation. The early years were filled with the excitement of building a life together, renting their first apartment, getting their first dog, and eventually welcoming their 2 children into the world. Alex, now a teenager, and Lily, just a little girl with the same bright eyes David had once adored in Maria. But something had changed. Over the past few years, David had started noticing subtle shifts in their relationship. Maria, once so eager to spend time with him, had become distant. Her phone seemed to occupy more of her attention than it should have. She was always working late, or out with friends more than ever before. David, ever the devoted husband, convinced himself it was nothing. Just stress from work, maybe the natural ebb and flow of any long-term relationship. That was until one evening about 6 months ago. It had been a Friday. David had come home early from his job at the law firm, hoping to surprise Maria with dinner. But when he opened the door, the first thing he noticed was the unmistakable scent of cologne. Not his cologne, someone else's. The panic in his chest had been immediate, but he pushed it aside, convincing himself it was nothing. Maybe it was a client of hers, or a colleague she'd run into. Then he saw the text on her phone, a message that would stay burned into his memory forever. "I can't wait to see you tonight. It's been too long." That was when the pieces started falling into place, slowly at first, like a puzzle David had been unwilling to solve. He'd caught glimpses of her secretive behavior before, the late-night texts, the way she'd guard her phone as if her life depended on it. But this was undeniable. There had been someone else. David didn't confront her that night. He couldn't. He wasn't ready for what that would mean. Instead, he did what any person in his situation might do. He buried it. He acted like nothing was wrong. He pretended everything was fine. But the cracks in the foundation had already begun to widen, and no amount of pretending would ever make them disappear. Weeks went by, and David's suspicion grew. He became a shadow in his own home, watching Maria from the sidelines, noticing every small detail, the way she hesitated before answering certain questions, the way she always seemed to have an excuse to avoid intimacy. He couldn't stand it any longer. He had to know the truth. He had to confirm it, whether he liked it or not. And now, as the moment arrived, he found himself faced with the choice: confront her directly or go the route of the DNA test. The latter felt like a betrayal in itself, but what other option did he have? He couldn't keep living in this fog of doubt. He needed the truth, even if it destroyed him. David glanced at his phone, the message flashing back at him from his earlier research. It had all started with a simple search online: how to test if a child is biologically yours. But now it felt like he was standing at the edge of a cliff, staring down into the abyss. He took a deep breath and dialed her number. The phone rang once, then twice before Maria picked up. "Hey," her voice was warm, almost too warm. "What's up?" David's heart was pounding in his chest. He almost hung up then and there, but he didn't. Instead, he said, his voice steady but tense, "Maria, we need to talk. When you get home, can we sit down? There's something important we need to discuss." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. A beat too long. Then she replied, her tone changing slightly. "Sure, of course. I'll be home soon." David hung up, his hand shaking slightly. It wasn't just the question of what he would say to her, but the bigger, more terrifying question of how he would live with the answer. David sat at the kitchen table, his eyes fixed on the small, pale spot on the wooden surface where his coffee cup had once been. It was as though the room itself held its breath, waiting for the storm to come. He could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator in the background, the ticking of the clock on the wall. But it all felt distant, muffled, like he was underwater. Every passing second felt like a countdown to something he wasn't sure he was ready to face. The front door creaked open, and David looked up. Maria stepped inside, her heels clicking sharply against the floor as she shrugged off her coat. She was as beautiful as ever, the same woman he had fallen in love with all those years ago, but now there was an almost imperceptible distance in her eyes, something that wasn't there before. It was a coldness he hadn't noticed until recently. "David, what's going on?" she asked, setting her purse down on the counter. Her voice was light, almost too casual, as though she hadn't a care in the world. But David could sense the tension in her words, the slight tightness in her throat. She could tell something was off. But did she know exactly what? He didn't answer right away. Instead, he motioned for her to sit down across from him. She hesitated for a moment before sliding into the chair, crossing her arms defensively. The warmth she usually radiated felt dimmed, replaced by an aura of nervous energy. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. David felt his heart hammering in his chest, each beat echoing in his ears. What could he say to make this easier? What words could he use to unearth the truth without it all falling apart? "David." Maria broke the silence, her voice now tinged with concern. "What's going on? You're scaring me." He opened his mouth to speak, but the words caught in his throat. How could he even begin to ask her about this? How could he confront the woman he thought he knew, the mother of his children, with the reality that he suspected she had been lying to him all along? "Maria," he said finally, his voice hoarse. "We need to talk about Alex." She froze. Her eyes flickered, a flash of something, guilt, maybe, flashed across her face, but it was gone before he could be sure. For a second, he wondered if she had known this was coming, if she had been waiting for him to ask. But he pushed that thought aside. Now wasn't the time for doubts, now was the time for truth. "Is there something wrong with him?" she asked quickly, her voice rising slightly. "Is he okay?" David shook his head slowly. "Alex is fine. He's a good kid. But I need to know something." His voice cracked, but he kept going, his gaze fixed on her, trying to read the expression on her face. "Maria, I've been thinking a lot about this, and I need to ask you one question. A question I never thought I'd have to ask. Is Alex really my son?" The words hit the air like a bomb, exploding with a force that seemed to shake the very foundation of their relationship. Maria's face went pale, her lips trembling as she stared at him, shocked, stunned into silence. For a long moment, she said nothing. The seconds stretched out like hours. "David, what are you talking about?" Her voice was shaky now, her earlier calmness shattered. "What do you mean? Is Alex your son?" "Of course he's your son. What the hell is this about?" David leaned forward, the words spilling out of him with a sense of urgency, the floodgates opening once and for all. "I saw the messages, Maria. I know you've been seeing someone else. I know about the affair." Her eyes widened, the color draining from her face completely. "David," she began, but her voice faltered. She tried again, but the words weren't coming easily. I don't know what you're talking about. I've never." "Don't lie to me," he shouted, his voice cracking with a mix of anger and despair. "I saw the text messages. I saw them. The ones from him. Can't wait to see you tonight. That's not something a wife says to her husband. That's not something a mother says to her family. And I've tried to ignore it. I've tried to give you the benefit of the doubt, but I can't anymore. I need to know the truth. I need to know if Alex is really my son." Maria sat frozen in her chair, her mouth open, but no words coming out. She looked like a deer caught in headlights, her entire world suddenly crashing down around her. David could see the tears welling in her eyes, but it wasn't the kind of tears he expected. It wasn't regret or sorrow, it was fear. Fear of being caught, fear of losing everything. "I didn't mean for it to happen," she finally whispered, her voice barely audible. "It was a mistake, David. A horrible mistake. But it's not what you think. Alex, he's yours. He's always been yours." David felt a cold chill wash over him. He didn't know whether he should feel relief or something much darker, something more gut-wrenching. The knot in his stomach tightened. She was lying. He could feel it. But what was the truth? And more importantly, what was he supposed to do with it? "Maria," he whispered, his voice trembling. "I need the truth. I need to know if he's mine. I can't keep going on like this. Not anymore." There was another long silence, this one stretching unbearably long as Maria looked down at her hands, wringing them together in her lap. Finally, she spoke, her voice cracking. "I'll do whatever it takes to prove it to you," she said, her words heavy with emotion. "But you need to understand. I love you, David. I never wanted to hurt you." David stared at her, the woman he had known and loved for so long, and for the first time in years, he felt like a stranger to her. He wasn't sure who was lying to whom anymore, or if he was even capable of trusting anyone, least of all the woman he had once trusted above all else. "Then prove it," he said, his voice low but firm. "Take the test. For Alex, for me. I need to know the truth, Maria. I need to know if I'm the father." She nodded slowly, her eyes filled with unshed tears. "I will," she whispered. "I will do it. But please don't hate me." David didn't answer. He couldn't. Because in that moment, he wasn't sure who he hated more, her for betraying him or himself for not seeing it sooner. The following days dragged by like a slow-motion train wreck. David could barely bring himself to go to work. His thoughts constantly returned to the conversation he'd had with Maria. Her promises, her pleading, the way she had begged him to believe her, had done little to soothe the growing ache inside him. He couldn't help but replay every moment over and over in his head, each word, each look. Wondering if there was more to the story that she hadn't told him. She had agreed to the DNA test, of course. She had no choice but to agree. David wasn't sure if he wanted the results or if he was dreading them, but he had made up his mind. There was no turning back now. He spent the next few days in a daze. He went through the motions at work, his colleagues oblivious to the storm brewing in his personal life. He found himself zoning out in meetings, his mind drifting to thoughts of Maria and Alex. Were they his son and wife? Or were they something else? Was this all one big lie? Could he trust anything anymore? Meanwhile, Maria seemed to go about her days with an eerie calmness, almost as if she had resigned herself to the inevitable. She apologized again and again, but David wasn't sure if her apologies were for the affair itself or for the impending truth of the test. In her eyes he saw fear. Fear of losing him, but also fear of something darker. A fear of being exposed. But then things took a turn. It was Friday evening, exactly a week after their conversation. David had just returned home, exhausted from a day that felt no different from the last. He barely had time to remove his coat before he saw Maria standing in the kitchen, her back to him. The look on her face was so different from the way it had been before. There was a quiet intensity about her now, an air of uncertainty mixed with something else, something he couldn't quite place. "David, we need to talk," she said without turning around. David's heart sank. He felt a chill run down his spine, and for a brief moment, he wondered if she was about to tell him the worst thing he could imagine. Maybe she would confess to everything. Maybe Alex wasn't even his. Maybe it was all a lie. The thought of it made his stomach twist in knots. He stepped forward, his voice tight. "What's going on, Maria?" She turned slowly, her eyes meeting his with a kind of resigned sadness. "I think we need to have the test done sooner. I can't wait anymore, David. I need to know too. I need the truth." He stared at her for a long moment. "You mean you're willing to go through with it? To prove to me that Alex is mine?" Maria nodded slowly. "I don't care about the results anymore, David. I need us to move forward. We've been living in this shadow for too long, and I can't live like this anymore. I want to know. I want to know what's real, and I want you to know it too." David stood there silent. He had always imagined this moment would be different. He had imagined that the test would bring clarity, that it would be a clear-cut answer. But now, standing there with Maria, who, despite everything, he still loved, he couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the story, something he still wasn't seeing. "Why, Maria? Why didn't you tell me? Why did you let this go on for so long?" His voice cracked with the weight of all the years of their marriage, all the years of trusting her and believing in their family. Maria's face crumpled, and tears filled her eyes. She wiped them away quickly, but they kept coming. "I didn't want to hurt you, David. I didn't want to destroy our family. It happened. It wasn't supposed to, and I regret it, more than you'll ever know. But I don't know how to fix it now. All I can do is face the consequences." David took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. The whirlwind of emotions inside him was overwhelming, a suffocating mix of hurt, betrayal, anger, and confusion. He wanted to scream at her, to demand answers, but at the same time, he wanted to pull her close and pretend that everything was okay. He couldn't do that anymore, though. He couldn't ignore the truth. "I don't know if I can forgive you for this," he said quietly, almost to himself. Maria looked up at him, her eyes wide with desperation. "David, please. I know what I did was unforgivable, but I need you to understand that I love you. I've always loved you, and I don't want to lose you." The words hung between them, heavy with years of history and the weight of their broken relationship. But David knew one thing for certain now: he couldn't go back. He couldn't pretend that everything was fine. Not after everything he had learned, not after seeing the cracks in their marriage widen into an irreparable chasm. Before he could respond, the phone rang. The sound broke the tension in the air, and David looked down at it in surprise. The name on the screen made his heart skip a beat. It was the clinic. He answered quickly, his voice tight. "Hello, Mr. Peterson," a woman's voice asked on the other end. "We have the results of your DNA test. Are you available to come in, or would you prefer we send them to you? David's mind raced. Maria was staring at him, her face pale, her hands trembling slightly. He could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him. This was it. The truth was about to be laid bare. "I'll come in," David said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Okay, Mr. Peterson, we'll see you shortly." He hung up the phone, and for a long moment neither he nor Maria spoke. There was nothing left to say. David stood up slowly, his mind reeling. "Let's go. We'll know soon enough." Maria nodded silently, her face a mask of anguish. Together they left the house, the door closing behind them with the finality of a chapter ending. The drive to the clinic felt endless. The silence in the car was thick, almost suffocating, as if the air itself was holding its breath. Maria sat beside David, her hands folded tightly in her lap, eyes staring out of the passenger window, her face pale. David, gripping the wheel so hard his knuckles were white, couldn't shake the feeling that his entire life had been leading to this moment. He had never imagined he would find himself here, sitting next to the woman he loved, a woman he thought he knew better than anyone else, yet now uncertain of everything. Every mile that passed seemed to drag him further into the unknown. He glanced at Maria every few seconds, but she was too lost in her thoughts to even notice. She looked like a stranger now, like someone he used to know, someone he used to trust. He wondered if this was the last time they would ever drive together, if this was the end of a chapter neither of them could turn back from. The clinic came into view, a modern glass building that looked sterile, too clean for something so personal, so painful. David parked the car in the lot and turned off the engine, but neither of them moved. "Are you sure you want to do this?" Maria asked finally, her voice small and fragile, barely a whisper. She wasn't asking about the test, though she was asking if David was ready to face the truth. It wasn't the kind of question he wanted to answer. Not now, not with everything on the line. "I need to know, Maria," he said, his voice strained. He didn't look at her as he spoke, as though acknowledging her presence might shatter what little resolve he had left. "I need to know if Alex is mine. I need to know if everything you've told me is real." She nodded slowly, her eyes welling with tears. "I know, David, I know." The two of them stepped out of the car and walked into the clinic in silence. The lobby was calm, too calm, the kind of calm that only made the situation more unbearable. David checked in at the front desk, his hands still trembling as the receptionist took his information and handed him a clipboard. They were called into a small consultation room soon after, and there, on a cold metal chair, was the envelope. The test results. The moment of truth. Maria sat across from David, her hands nervously twisting in her lap. David could feel her eyes on him, but he didn't dare look at her. He couldn't afford to. Not now. Finally, David opened the envelope. The paper inside was stark white, the print clear and concise. He unfolded it slowly, each movement seeming to echo in his ears. He scanned the results quickly, his eyes darting across the text, the words almost blurring together. At first, his brain refused to process it. The words on the paper didn't make sense. It was like reading a foreign language, like trying to decipher a code that didn't belong in his life. Then, it hit him. The biological father of Alex Peterson is confirmed to be David Peterson. His heart stopped. He read the line again, then a third time, as if the truth had to settle into his bones before he could fully accept it. Alex was his son. Alex was his. The fear, the doubt that had plagued him for months, the gnawing sensation in his gut. It was all for nothing. But even though the results confirmed what he had hoped for, they didn't bring him the relief he expected. Instead, a new weight seemed to settle on his chest, heavier than anything he had felt before. He looked at Maria and saw the relief on her face too, her eyes filled with something that almost resembled gratitude. But there was no joy, no sense of victory. There was only the dull ache of everything that had come before. David set the paper down slowly, his hands trembling. He couldn't speak. For a moment he wasn't sure what to say. What was there left to say when the truth had already been written? Maria, for her part, seemed to be struggling with the same emotions. She opened her mouth to speak, but nothing came out at first. She wasn't sure what words could make any of this better, any of this right. "I told you," she said finally, her voice raw with emotion. "I told you he was yours." David nodded, but it felt empty. The truth, this truth, wasn't enough to fix the damage, wasn't enough to make him feel the way he used to. He didn't feel like a winner. He didn't feel like he had regained anything. He only felt hollow. The silence in the room stretched, suffocating, and for a moment, neither of them knew what to do next. The results were clear, the truth undeniable. But that didn't change what had happened between them. It didn't change the betrayal. It didn't change how he had been broken by the one person he had trusted the most. "I know this doesn't fix everything, David," Maria said quietly, her voice trembling as she wiped away a tear. "But I need you to know that I never stopped loving you. I was wrong. So wrong. And I can't undo what I did. But please don't let this be the end." David's heart ached at the sound of her voice. Part of him wanted to forgive her. Part of him wanted to believe in the woman he had once loved. But another part of him, the part that had seen through her lies, the part that had endured her betrayal, couldn't forget. He couldn't forget the nights he had spent wondering if he was living a lie. He couldn't forget the doubt that had taken root inside him, the way everything he thought he knew had unraveled before his eyes. "I don't know if I can move past this, Maria," David said, his voice breaking. "I don't know if I can ever forget what you've done. The trust is gone. It's just gone." Maria's face crumpled again, and for a moment, David saw her as she truly was, a woman caught in the web of her own mistakes, begging for a way out. But David couldn't find the strength to save her. "Not now, not after everything. I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry." David stood up, the weight of the result still pressing on his chest. "I need time, Maria. I need time to figure this out. I can't make any decisions right now." And with that, he turned and walked out of the room, leaving the clinic, leaving her behind. He wasn't sure where he was going, only that he couldn't stay there. He couldn't stay with her, not until he had the time to figure out what he needed. The truth had been revealed, but the journey wasn't over, not by a long shot.